Today, we live in a time of political conflict. One side lives as a cult to a megalomaniacal ruler who has threatened to overthrow the democratic status quo of our nation to protect his ego from basic insecurities about typically shallow inadequacies, and the other side is a fractious web of disunited factions all trying to fight for supremacy over a party that continues to waffle and struggle to retain power at every turn despite only needing to do what the people ask of them. One of the hot-button issues that people continually struggle with is our nation's Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. We understand, first and foremost, how divided this topic can be. Some have lost loved ones to those using these potentially deadly tools, and some have protected themselves and their loved ones during legitimate crises. Some believe that the use of these tools is enshrined in our Constitution, and we are, personally, one of those people. And we do believe that the Constitution is, overall, one of the better written government documents presently in existence, at least for its time. Cards on the table, we are also quite often proud to be an American. Sometimes deliriously so, as in it gets on the nerves of people who associate with us whenever we get so damned patriotic. We consider this healthy to do every now and then, so long as it is done within reason and or at proper times like during the 4th of July, or when America does something really cool in a movie and it gets big in the court of public opinions. But that patriotism takes a very different form than what most would seem to think. For us, being an American is about being able to be educated, being able to believe what we want without government persecution, and to be allowed to fight for our values in public with our voice so that the status quo may proceed and evolve in accordance to the advance of technology and cultural ideas. That, in our mind, makes America a more thoughtful and well-reasoned nation, to have that open to the people as we do. America allows us to be a citizen scientist, to fight for what's right, and to be an active part in shaping the nation in which we live. There are still many nations where that is not an option, so we are thankful for this. However, there are those that have decided that nothing needs to be changed, that the laws of the past, as written, are acceptable to dictate the standards of today's culture and technology. That is foolish and naive. As this is a very opinionated topic, we shall give some of our own opinions, ones we've made clear and publicly stated many times before, so they may be corroborated if those interested decide to look deep enough. Let this also stand as yet another example of that position. We do not own a firearm, nor do we really have the desire to own one in this day and age, as we feel that people should be more civilized than having need of them to solve our problems. However, the fact of the matter is that people are not more civilized than that, and the age-old path of dedication to martial arts that we have set ourselves on is not so available or popular anymore, so it is far more important to face reality. The reality is that most of the world is a potentially dangerous place, and sometimes the average person needs something to set them on the level with those who would violate their rights and safety, perhaps even their lives. The item that levels that playing field is the firearm, colloquially known as the gun. It is a tool no different than the wrench or the axe, with the sole exception that its only purpose is to limit or end life. It does not have feelings, and it is our personal opinion that we should not have feelings about it. We accept that, as a tool, we should just always have one in our proverbial toolbox, if at all possible. And, like any tool, a proper user must have a functioning understanding of what they are handling. They should understand the safety mechanisms, the ins and outs. Maybe they don't need to know how to make it or even necessarily repair big problems with it, but they should be able to diagnose small problems and have been conditioned with the good sense to realize when they are out of their depth and to take it to an expert. Just as we understand how to drive a car, we also understand when to take the car into a shop to get it fixed or at least checked on. As with any job, any user should also be judged on whether or not they are fit for the position to be using that tool. If a worker at a job does not have a driver's license, they will not be allowed to drive on the job. Them's just the rules. And because of the might of modern technology, our ability to integrate these rules and qualifications into the workplace and even into society at large has become greater over the years, such that it has become completely seamless in some sectors. That is correct. We stand, today, on the precipice of a more perfect political science, thanks to the advance of modern information technology. And that is no opinion. We are just 2 steps away from handling our problems much more efficiently and equitably if we could just get out of our own way. But that is a story for another time. Suffice to say, we have a lot of feelings about firearms. They're an extremely divisive topic, and we understand the aversion to them. But we think that, ultimately, that aversion is led by misinformation and a lack of crucial education due to cultural stigma. Not, of course, to dismiss the personal experiences of those who have suffered and lost at the hands of dangerous or ignorant individuals in possession of firearms. It is not and never will be our position to dismiss those particular feelings. At least one nation has an extremely well-armed society, and that society is also one of the politest and safest in the world. Switzerland. In this country, people are educated from a very young age about the nature of firearms, their purpose, their inner workings, their history, their use. There's a very strong culture around firearms and firearm safety. Nearly every household has a rifle. Per capita, they are in the top 20 firearm-owning nations as of 2017. And yet, this is a peaceful country that has been able to maintain its sovereignty and is regarded as a bastion of human rights in the modern day. They continue to head experiments on bettering the quality of life for their own people at every opportunity, and the presence of firearms has not brought the downfall of public order and safety. Why is this? It is our personal opinion that this is because of education and its constant presence in Swiss culture, especially around these potentially deadly tools. Rather than shy away from firearms, the Swiss have had to accept the fact that violence occurs, sometimes all around them, and that the best way to protect themselves and even potentially prevent violence in the first place is by mastering it in turn. As a martial artist, we've always abhorred the idea of actually hurting people. We do not relish in the idea of bringing defeat upon our foes. We have no desire to injure or damage their egos. But we are ready to do so, and we have mastered as many techniques as we can to ensure such options are available to us in the future. We have had to use such options before, and we're not unwilling to do so again. And when it comes to our life, which we've had to fight for before, we're prepared to use any tool potentially at our disposal. There is, of course, etiquette to all of this. We would never use a tool we did not understand or were not practiced in. So we don't personally use firearms because we're not practiced with them. We understand the nature of the tool makes it more dangerous to use if we aren't practiced with it, if we don't fully understand what we're doing with it. And we understand that anyone who wants to use that tool should be more practiced than we are. But we are educated enough to know at least this. And that's where the crux of our case will stand and die if it must. We could create a smarter Second Amendment that utilizes both common sense and expert opinion alongside modern information technology to ensure it is fair and equitable for all. According to the Washington Post, 2020 was host to just over 19,000 gun deaths. We aren't a mind reader, but we think everyone with a good head on their shoulders and a heart in their chest can agree that such a number is probably somewhere around 19,000 gun deaths too many. We're pretty sure everyone's comfortable agreeing on that. Yes? Good? Excellent. We also live in a society wherein science can, as established earlier, help streamline checks for qualifications much more capably than classic paper bureaucracy has been managing lately. Background checks are easier than ever to do, such that many companies simply hire private firms to do it for them. There are entire business sectors based around background checking people. So please don't act like these are foreign ideas that we're bringing to the table. If the gun you want is properly legal and you really are qualified to own this gun, then you shouldn't feel super uneasy about someone running your stats to get it. For that matter, many firearms outlets already have required background checks, so the tide is already coming in. We might as well move this up to a more centralized level and at least create a single system for it that will benefit all sides. It's time we moved ahead with the times and adopted a more successful model. More importantly, we simply must stop throwing out the problematic and fallacious straw man that anti-gun proponents simply want to, quote, take our guns, unquote. We need to stop refusing to justify our position and stop using a nearly 2.5 century old piece of paper as the sole reason why we should keep our right to arms. This sort of polarizing rhetoric is going to do nobody any favors and will continue to keep this issue a hot-button one. We will only stoke the fires of violence and extremism if the Second Amendment defenders try to address this argument as though their position were an obvious conclusion. If we're to find a solution to this very real conflict, we must calm down and talk to each other about it as equals, as fellow Americans. Originally, the Second Amendment, contrary to what many defenders say, was written to ensure that America had a well-operating militia that could act as a draft of capable and armed people to defend the country in times of emergency. We couldn't afford to have a standing military at the time, you see. So, the average citizen was empowered by the Second Amendment to own the highest capable military technologies of the day to defend against the potential encroachment of the British Empire if the time came to it. That is why the Second Amendment was so powerful to begin with, and that was the tyrannical government, quote-unquote, that the Second Amendment was talking about rising up against. But that time is gone. The British Empire is no more, and America has a standing army more powerful and more expensive than any other. So we like to think that the Second Amendment need not be quite so powerful. Now, we don't want anyone to take anyone else's guns, but there's certainly an availability for a bar of ownership and perhaps a general firepower in this day and age. We don't live in the Wild West anymore. We do not need Wild West firepower. Mental illness is also a problem in our society. 2/3 of all firearm deaths are also firearm suicides, and we personally know the struggles with depression and anxiety that can bring some people to feel that death would be the easy way out. Perhaps with proper education and mental health support, this number would fall considerably, and with better screenings in regards to mental health through more carefully constructed background checks, we could prevent these tragic incidents from happening in the first place. We live in the modern day, with mental health awareness supposedly part of our everyday medical scientific standard. However, we're failing those who actually suffer thanks to our inability to face the truth as a society and agree on basic facts like, maybe it's not the distant past and we probably shouldn't act like it. We think having a self-defense weapon in one's own home and maybe a concealed carry is just fine, but only if we remember that getting a legal concealed carry permit is not a super easy feat. You have to work for it. You have to research everything about it and follow the rules to the letter. You have to regularly renew it to keep it valid and attend government-sponsored courses to show that you're capable of using it responsibly and that you know your responsibilities with it. If you want to carry around your concealed weapon for your own defense or whatever, you gotta know it, and you gotta know all the laws and rules and paperwork surrounding it like the back of your hand. We think that, and once again, this is the crux of this entire conflict, education is paramount. If you refuse to educate your interlocutors on the deeper nuance of your position, or simply don't have that deeper nuance, it makes your position weaker. The less we educate our children and the general populace at large on the uses and potential dangers of firearms and the etiquette that should surround them, the weaker our position for gun ownership and rights becomes. Our right to bear arms, realistically, only extends as far as our ability to cogently and satisfyingly justify our position. We believe that there are plenty of good and satisfying defenses for that position, but, unlike many of our Second Amendment defending contemporaries, we understand that our inability to cogently erect those defenses necessarily disqualifies our position in the court of public opinions. If we are not willing to defend our positions admirably and honestly and with the greatest of tolerance, patience, and academic integrity, then we are not worth defending our positions, and perhaps our position needs to change to be more defensible. An armed society is a polite society, but only if it's also an educated society.